Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Jack Reed stood at the back of the small chapel, watching his wife orchestrate their son's memorial like a board meeting. Betty moved between the sparse gathering of relatives and acquaintances with practiced efficiency, her black dress immaculate, her makeup perfect despite the occasion. No flowers, she had insisted 3 days ago. Milo wouldn't have wanted all that fuss. Jack's hands clenched at his sides. Milo had loved flowers, dandelions especially. The boy would pick them from their yard every spring, presenting wilted bouquets to Jack with gap-toothed grins. "Jack!" Betty appeared beside him, her voice low and controlled. "The service is starting." He followed her to the front row, noting how few people had come. Betty had kept the announcement small, private. "For our privacy," she'd explained. But Jack wondered who she was really protecting. The pastor, a thin man Jack had never met, spoke in generic terms about children and heaven. No stories about Milo. No memories shared. Just empty words floating over an empty casket. "We gather not to mourn," the pastor droned, "but to celebrate a life well lived." 6 years old. Jack's jaw tightened. How was 6 years a life well lived? "The family has chosen cremation," the pastor continued, "as a symbol of return to the earth that nurtured young Milo." Jack turned to Betty. "Since when do we cremate?" "Shoo!" Her hand touched his arm, fingers cold through his suit jacket. "We discussed this." "No, you decided this." Betty's grip tightened. Her smile never wavered, but her whisper carried steel. "Don't make a scene. Not here." After the service, people offered condolences. Jack nodded and shook hands, but the words blurred together. His sister, Jenny, pulled him aside near the chapel door. "You look like hell," she said, studying his face with worried eyes. "I feel worse." "When's the burial?" Jack's mouth went dry. "There isn't one. Betty wants cremation." Jenny frowned. "That doesn't sound like you." "It's not." "Then why?" "Jack." Betty materialized between them, her social smile bright and cold. "We should go. The crematory is waiting." "Already?" Jenny asked. "It's been 20 minutes. Delays only make things harder," Betty said, taking Jack's arm possessively. "I found it's best to handle these things quickly. For closure." Jack let himself be led away, but Guinea's frown burned in his memory. At the crematory, Betty signed papers while Jack stood frozen in the hallway. Through a window, he glimpsed a small casket disappearing behind steel doors gone, without him ever seeing inside. "It's done," Betty said, emerging with a small urn. "We can start healing now." Scene 2, fractures at home 3 weeks later. Jack submitted his resignation letter to the university. Department head Dr. Morrison called twice. Jack didn't answer. He moved his tools into the garage and started working with his hands instead of his mind. What made sense? Cut it, sand it, join it. Simple, honest. Unlike everything else in his life lately. Betty found him there on a Tuesday morning, building a bookshelf from reclaimed oak. "You can't hide in here forever," she said, stepping carefully around with shavings in her expensive heels. "I'm not hiding. I'm working." "On what?" "Furniture." "Jack, you're a professor." "We're a professor." "Not anymore." Betty perched on his workbench, careful not to disturb the perfect arrangement of her clothes. "I've been seeing someone. A therapist. Remy Vaughn. He specializes in grief counseling." Jack looked up from measuring a board. "Good for you. He thinks you should come too." "No, Jack." I said no. His voice carried an edge that made Betty step back. "You deal with this your way. I'll deal with it mine. By building furniture. By doing something real." Betty's face hardened. "Milo is dead, Jack. Hiding won't bring him back." The measuring tape snapped shut in Jack's hand with a sharp crack. "I'm not the one hiding." That evening, Jack sat in Milo's room, untouched since the accident. Baseball cards scattered on the desk. A half-finished Lego spaceship on the floor. The smell of grape-scented markers and little boy sweat still lingered in the air. Betty appeared in the doorway. "We should pack this up." "No, Jack, it's not healthy." "Don't." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her take a step back. "Don't tell me what's healthy. You cremated our son before I could say goodbye. You planned his memorial like a business lunch. You're seeing a therapist, but won't grieve. So don't lecture me about healthy. Betty's composure cracked slightly. I'm trying to move forward. Forward from what? You never went backward. You never stopped. You never even cried. People grieve differently, do they? Jack stood up, and Betty retreated further into the hallway. Because I've been wondering about that. About how different your grief looked from mine. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm starting to pay attention. Jack visited Milo's grave every afternoon. The headstone was simple granite with dates that felt impossible. The earth above the empty casket had already settled. He brought dandelions when he found them, despite Betty's disapproval. Weeds, she called them. But Milo had loved weeds. They're tough, Dad, he'd said once, crouched in their yard examining a dandelion growing through sidewalk cracks. Nothing stops them. On a gray Thursday, Jack knelt beside the headstone and arranged 3 dandelions against the granite. The cemetery was empty except for a groundskeeper working near the oak trees 50 yards away. Hey, buddy, Jack said quietly. Mom's still seeing that therapist. Says he's helping her process her emotions. But she doesn't have any emotions to process, far as I can tell. A breeze rustled the oak leaves. Jack closed his eyes and listened to the sound, remembering how Milo used to insist they were whispering secrets. Dad. Jack's eyes snapped open. The voice had been small, young, familiar. He turned around and saw a boy standing 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a large headstone. Small frame, dark hair, wearing a blue jacket that looked exactly like Milo. The boy stared at him for a moment, then turned and ran. Wait. Jack scrambled to his feet and gave chase, but the boy was fast and small. He darted between headstones and disappeared behind the maintenance building. Jack searched for 20 minutes, checking behind every monument, every tree. The groundskeeper hadn't seen anything. Jack asked twice. You okay, sir? The man asked. You look pale. Jack drove home in a daze, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Grief hallucinations were normal, he told himself. The mind playing tricks. Wishful thinking given form. But the boy had been wearing Milo's jacket. That night, Jack lay awake staring at the ceiling while Betty slept soundly beside him. Her breathing was even, untroubled. She'd never had nightmares about Milo. Never woken up crying. Never talked in her sleep. At 3 in the morning, Jack got up and went to his office. He pulled out the folder of documents Betty had given him after the accident. Death certificate, cremation authorization, insurance papers that he studied each page carefully, noting details he'd been too shocked to process before. The death certificate was signed by Dr. Marcus Keller, a name Jack didn't recognize. The accident had supposedly happened on Tuesday, April 15th, while Jack was in Chicago for a conference. Betty's statement to police was simple. She and Milo had gone hiking at Swope Park. The boy wandered off the trail and fell down a ravine. By the time emergency services arrived, he was gone. Injuries too severe for viewing. Immediate cremation recommended for the family's peace of mind. Jack picked up his phone and called the medical examiner's office. After being transferred 3 times, he reached someone willing to talk. Dr. Keller. The woman sounded puzzled. He hasn't worked for our office in 2 years. He's in private practice now, but he signed a death certificate in April. That's unusual. Hold on. Jack waited, his heart pounding. Sir, I'm showing that certificate in our system, but it's flagged as an external consultation. Dr. Keller was brought in as a specialist. Specialist in what? I can't really say more without proper authorization, but you might want to speak with the police detective who handled the case. Jack hung up and stared at the papers spread across his desk. Betty had insisted on handling everything while he was too distraught to think clearly. She'd made all the calls, signed all the forms, arranged everything. He'd never actually seen his son's body. The thought hit him like a physical blow. In his grief, he'd let Betty manage the unthinkable details. But now, in the quiet of 3 in the morning, the questions wouldn't stop coming. Why cremate immediately? Why no autopsy? Why hadn't the park rangers found the body if Milo had fallen in such a public area? Jack opened his laptop and searched for Dr. Marcus Keller. The man's practice was listed as trauma and crisis consulting with an address across town. His website showed testimonials about helping families through difficult transitions. One name in the testimonials caught Jack's attention: Remy Vaughn, LMFT. Dr. Keller provides compassionate care during life's most challenging moments. The same Remy Vaughn who was counseling Betty. Jack closed the laptop and sat back in his chair. Outside, the first hints of dawn were touching the horizon. His mind felt clearer than it had in weeks, sharpened by suspicion instead of dulled by grief. He thought about the boy in the cemetery, about Betty's dry eyes and perfect composure, about a death certificate signed by a doctor who didn't work for the medical examiner anymore. "What did you do, Betty?" he whispered to the empty room. Jack confronted Betty at breakfast, sliding the death certificate across the table as she sipped her coffee. "Tell me about Dr. Keller." Betty barely glanced at the paper. "What about him?" "He doesn't work for the medical examiner's office." So why did he sign Milo's death certificate?" Betty set down her coffee cup with deliberate calm. "He was a specialist. The regular examiner thought we needed someone with more experience in trauma cases." "Experience in what kind of trauma?" "Jack." Betty's voice carried a warning. "You're spiraling. This is exactly what Remy said would happen." Remy Vaughn, who gave Dr. Keller a glowing testimonial on his website. For the first time, Betty's composure slipped. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're investigating me?" "I'm investigating our son's death. The son I never saw. The son you had cremated before I got home. You were in no condition to make decisions. I was in no condition to see my child's body." "Jack, stop." Betty stood up, smoothing her skirt. "You're having a breakdown. This paranoid thinking, these wild theories, it's textbook complicated grief. Remy warned me this might happen." "Did he?" "How convenient. I'm calling him. You need help." "The only help I need is answers." Betty pulled out her phone, but Jack reached across and took it from her hands. "What did you do with Milo?" "I didn't do anything with him." "He's dead, Jack." "Dead? Prove it." Betty stared at him, her mask of concern finally falling away to reveal something colder underneath. "You're sick. Then show me the autopsy report. Show me pictures from the accident scene. Show me something that proves my son is actually dead. I don't have to prove anything to you." Betty grabbed her purse from the counter. "I'm going to Remy's office. When you're ready to accept reality and get the help you need, call me." After she left, Jack sat alone in their kitchen, staring at the death certificate. The document that had ended his old life and started this strange new one where his wife showed no grief and his son appeared in cemeteries. He picked up his phone and called directory assistance. "I need a number for Dr. Zadie Monroe. She's a child psychologist." Zadie had treated Milo briefly for anxiety the previous year. Nothing serious, just some trouble adjusting when Jack had been traveling more for work. But she'd been kind to Milo, patient. And more importantly, she'd known him. The receptionist at Zadie's practice said she could squeeze Jack in that afternoon. When he arrived at her office, Zadie's expression was guarded but sympathetic. "I was sorry to hear about Milo," she said, settling into her chair across from him. "How are you holding up?" "Not well. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Zadie nodded. "Did you ever have concerns about Betty's relationship with Milo?" The psychologist was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you asking?" "Because I think my son might still be alive." Zadie's eyebrows rose. "Jack, that's a very serious." "I know how it sounds, but I have questions about how he died. About Betty's behavior before and after. About the people she's working with now." "What kind of questions?" Jack laid out everything. The rushed cremation, the questionable death certificate, Betty's lack of emotion, the boy in the cemetery. Zadie listened without interrupting. "You're right to have questions," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "I filed a report with Child Services last year." "About Betty." Jack felt his heart skip. "What kind of report?" "Milo came to me with some concerning statements about his home life. Nothing physical, but there were signs of emotional manipulation. Betty was using sophisticated psychological techniques to control his behavior." "What kind of techniques?" "Gaslighting. Conditional affection. She convinced him that his emotional needs were burdens, that expressing sadness or fear meant he was weak and disappointing." Jack's hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to. I called your house 3 times and left messages. Betty said she discussed it with you and that you decided I was overstepping my boundaries. She never told me. I figured as much when you didn't return my calls. So I filed the report. What happened to it? Zadie's expression darkened. It was reviewed and dismissed. The caseworker said there wasn't sufficient evidence of abuse, and that Mrs. Reed's parenting style was unconventional but not harmful. Who was the caseworker? I don't remember the name offhand, but I can look it up. Zadie opened a file cabinet and pulled out a folder. Here it is. Caseworker was, that's odd. What? The reviewing supervisor was Dr. Marcus Keller. Jack called his sister from Zadie's parking lot. Jenny, I need your help with something, and I need you not to ask questions until I'm finished explaining. What's wrong? Can you meet me at my house in an hour? And bring your laptop, the one you use for work investigations. Jenny arrived with a laptop bag and a suspicious expression. She worked in manufacturing logistics, which meant she knew how to trace supply chains, follow paperwork, and spot inconsistencies in documentation. Show me what you've got, she said. Jack spread out all the documents on his dining room table. Death certificate, cremation authorization, Betty's police statement, insurance papers. Jenny studied them with the methodical attention she usually reserved for shipping manifests. This is hinky, she said after 20 minutes. Hinky how? First, the timeline. Your wife says Milo died Tuesday afternoon, but the death certificate wasn't issued until Thursday morning. That's unusual for an accidental death. Usually they process those faster. She pointed to the cremation authorization, and this was signed Wednesday evening, before the death certificate was official. How do you authorize cremation of someone who isn't legally dead yet? Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe. Jenny opened her laptop. Let me run some background checks on these doctors. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Dr. Marcus Keller, licensed in Missouri, but his practice specializes in crisis intervention and family transitions. That's therapy speak for messy divorces and custody battles. She kept typing. Remy Vaughn, licensed marriage and family therapist. But check this out, he's also listed as a business partner in something called TheraShield Institute. What's that? Private mental health facility. Very exclusive. Very expensive. And guess who's the medical director? Keller. Bingo. Jenny pulled up the bank statements Jack had grabbed from Betty's desk. Now let's see what your wife's been spending money on. She found it on the third page. A wire transfer for $60,000 to TheraShield Institute, dated the week after Milo's alleged death. What the hell would Betty need a $60,000 therapy retreat for? Jack asked. She wouldn't. But you know what costs $60,000? Private medical care, specialized treatment, or what? Housing someone long-term in a secure facility. Jack stared at the transfer record. You think she's paying them to keep Milo somewhere? I think your wife transferred enough money to cover a year's worth of residential care. The question is, care for who? Jack bought a GPS tracker at an electronics store and installed it on Betty's car while she was at her Thursday evening appointment with Remy. The device was small, magnetic, and designed for tracking teenage drivers. It would send location updates to Jack's phone every 15 minutes. He waited 3 days before Betty made an interesting trip. Friday afternoon, instead of going to Remy's downtown office, she drove 40 minutes west to a rural area outside the city limits. Jack followed at a distance, watching the GPS coordinates on his phone. Betty's car stopped at an address that didn't appear on any map. He drove past the location slowly and saw a long gravel driveway leading back into dense woods. He parked a half-mile down the road and walked back through the trees, approaching the property from behind. The house was a large, modern structure, isolated and private. 2 cars were in the driveway, Betty's sedan and a black SUV. Jack crept closer, staying hidden in the tree line. Through the large windows, he could see people moving around inside. Betty was talking to a tall man with graying hair, Remy Vaughn, based on the photo Jack had found online. And then he saw something that made his blood freeze. A small figure appeared in one of the upstairs windows. A boy, pressing his face against the glass, looking out at the woods. Jack pulled out his phone and zoomed in as far as the camera would go. The image was grainy, but the face was unmistakable. Milo, his son, was alive. Jack waited until midnight before returning to the property. He parked his truck a mile away and walked through the woods, carrying a small flashlight and his phone. The house was mostly dark except for a few security lights around the perimeter that he circled the building, looking for a way inside. The back door was locked, but a basement window was cracked open for ventilation. Jack squeezed through, dropping into a finished basement that smelled like antiseptic and something else medicine. The basement was set up like a small medical facility. Examination table, medication cabinet, for stand. Charts on the wall showing dosage schedules for various psychiatric drugs. Names were redacted, but one chart showed a patient listed only as M6, receiving daily doses of haloperidol and lorazepam. Milo was 6 years old. Jack took pictures of everything, then crept upstairs. The main floor was dark and quiet. Kitchen, living room, office. All clean and sterile, like a hospital. No family photos, no personal touches. This wasn't someone's home, it was a facility. He found stairs leading to the second floor and climbed them slowly, testing each step for creaks. At the top, a hallway stretched in both directions with multiple doors. Most were closed, but one had a small window. Jack peered through and saw a child's bedroom. Small bed, toys scattered on the floor, drawings taped to the wall. And sleeping in the bed, curled up under a blue blanket, was Milo. Jack tried the door handle. Locked, but he could see his son's face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Thinner than before, pale, but unmistakably alive. "Milo," Jack whispered through the door. "Milo, it's Dad." The boy stirred but didn't wake. Jack realized he was heavily sedated, that a sound from downstairs made Jack freeze. Voices. Someone had entered the house. Should increase his dosage, a man was saying. He still remembers too much. How much more? That was Betty's voice. Another 5 milligrams of the haloperidol, and we'll add some memory suppressants. The experimental stuff from the pharmaceutical trial. Will that hurt him? Define hurt. The man's voice was cold, clinical. It'll make him more compliant. Less likely to remember his previous life. Isn't that what we want? Jack felt rage burn through his chest like acid. He pulled out his phone and started recording. What about Jack? Betty asked. He's asking questions. Let him ask. Who's going to believe him? His wife says he's having a mental breakdown. His son is legally dead. There's no body to exhume, no evidence to find. He's not stupid. No, but he's grieving. And grief makes people irrational. If he becomes too much of a problem, we'll arrange for him to have an accident too. Jack had heard enough. He crept back toward the stairs, but his foot hit a loose floorboard. The squeak echoed through the quiet house. What was that? Betty's voice. Check upstairs. Jack ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, through the kitchen. Behind him, he heard shouting and the sound of heavy footsteps. He reached the basement window and squeezed through just as lights blazed on throughout the house. Then he made it to his truck and drove home with shaking hands, the recording safely stored on his phone. Evidence. Finally, evidence, but more than that, confirmation. Milo was alive, drugged, and imprisoned by his own mother and her accomplice. And Jack was going to burn their world down to get him back. The next morning, Jack showed the recording to Zadie and Jenny. They listened in horrified silence as Betty and Remy discussed drugging a 6-year-old boy to erase his memories. "This is monstrous," Zadie said when the recording ended. "We have to call the police." "With what?" "A recording I made by breaking into someone's house." "Jack," Jenny said quietly, "that's your son in there." "I know, and I'm going to get him out. But I need to do this right. If I screw this up, Betty and her friend disappear with Milo, and I never see him again." Zadie was already reaching for her phone. "I know someone who can help. Detective Lena Arrington. She handled a case for me last year, a custody situation where the mother was manipulating the system. Will she listen to us? She'll listen to me. Lena's good people, and she doesn't like predators who hurt children." They met Detective Arrington at a coffee shop an hour later. She was a compact woman in her 50s with tired eyes and calloused hands. She listened to Jack's story without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Play the recording," she said when he finished. Jack handed her his phone with earbuds. Lena's expression grew darker as she listened to Betty and Remy discussing drug dosages and memory suppression. "Jesus," she muttered when it ended. "This reminds me of another case I worked. Woman named Patricia Vance. She faked her daughter's death and disappeared with the kid to punish her ex-husband. What happened? Took us 2 years to find them. The girl was so heavily medicated by then, she didn't remember her father. Thought her mother had saved her from an abusive home. Lena handed the phone back. Patricia had help from a therapist too. Same basic setup, faked the death, drugged the kid, convinced them their old life was dangerous. Did you convict them? Patricia got 15 years. The therapist got 25. Lena leaned forward. But we had to catch them in the act. Your recording is good, but it's not enough for a warrant. We need more evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves your son is alive and being held against his will. Jack returned to the property the next evening, this time with a plan. He bought a small teddy bear with a hidden recording device inside a nanny cam designed to look like a child's toy. He waited until the house was dark, then approached the basement window again. This time, he knew the layout. He made it to Milo's room without incident and found the door unlocked. They must have felt secure after the previous night's scare. Milo was awake but groggy, sitting on his bed and staring at the wall with unfocused eyes. Milo, Jack whispered, kneeling beside the bed. It's Dad. The boy looked at him with slow recognition. Dad? You came back. I never left, buddy. I've been looking for you. Mom said you didn't want me anymore. She said you were happy I was gone. Jack's vision blurred with rage and grief. She lied. I never stopped looking for you. He placed the teddy bear on Milo's nightstand. This is for you, but special, okay? It's going to help me take you home. Can I go home now? Soon. Very soon. But I need you to keep the bear close to you, and if anyone asks where you got it, tell them you found it in the closet. Can you do that? Milo nodded slowly. The drugs made him sluggish, but his eyes held a spark of hope. I love you, buddy. I love you too, Dad. Jack slipped back out of the house and spent the next 2 days monitoring the audio feed from the teddy bear. He recorded hours of conversations between Betty, Remy, and a third man who turned out to be Dr. Keller. The breakthrough came on Tuesday morning. Milo's voice, clear and heartbreaking. Can I go home now? I miss my dad. I want to see my room. Your dad doesn't live there anymore, Betty's voice responded. He moved away. Dr. Remy is taking care of you now, but I want to go home. This is your home now. And if you keep asking about your old life, we'll have to give you more medicine. You don't want that, do you? No, but I miss my toys. And my baseball cards. Those old things? We'll get you new toys. Better toys. The recording was damning. Clear evidence of psychological manipulation and false imprisonment. Jack took it straight to Detective Arrington. This is what we need, she said after listening. I can get a warrant with this. Child endangerment, kidnapping, fraud will hit them with everything. When? Tonight. I'll coordinate with the county sheriff's department. They have jurisdiction out there. Lena stood up, already reaching for her phone. Go home, Jack. Stay by your phone. When we have your son, I'll call you immediately. The raid happened at 3 a.m. Jack waited at home, pacing his living room and checking his phone every 30 seconds. Finally, at 4:17 a.m., Detective Arrington called. We got him. Milo's safe. Jack's knees gave out. He sank into his chair, suddenly unable to breathe. He's en route to Children's Hospital for evaluation. You can meet us there. What about Betty? And the others? In custody. All 3 of them. Jack drove to the hospital through empty streets, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the emergency department, he found Detective Arrington waiting with a nurse. Room 314, the nurse said. He's stable, but sedated. The doctors want to keep him for observation while the drugs clear his system. Jack walked down the antiseptic hallway on unsteady legs. Through the door window, he could see Milo in a hospital bed, looking small and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Milo's eyes fluttered open at the sound. Dad, I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. Are you taking me home? Jack sat on the edge of the bed and took his son's small hand in his. Yeah, I'm taking you home. 3 days later, Milo was more alert but still fragile. The doctors had weaned him off the psychiatric medications, and his natural personality was slowly returning. He remembered more each day, but the memories came in fragments. They told me you were dead. Milo said one afternoon while Jack sat beside his hospital bed. Mom said there was an accident and you died and went to heaven. Jack's grip tightened on his son's hand. What else did they tell you? That I was sick, that my brain didn't work right, and I needed medicine to fix it. Dr. Remy said if I didn't take the medicine, I would hurt people. Did you believe them? Milo was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, the medicine made everything fuzzy, like dreaming when you're awake. But I kept remembering things, like building the fort in our backyard, and you teaching me to tie my shoes, and pancakes on Saturday mornings. Those were real memories, buddy. All of them. Why did Mom lie? Jack had dreaded this question, but he'd promised himself he would always tell Milo the truth. Because she's sick, not the kind of sick that medicine can fix. The kind of sick that makes people hurt other people. Is she going to jail? Yes. Good, Milo said with startling firmness. She scared me, and she made me forget you. Dr. Sarah Chun, the pediatric psychiatrist overseeing Milo's recovery, pulled Jack aside after visiting hours. He's resilient, she said. Children often are, but he'll need ongoing therapy to process the trauma. What he experienced, systematic psychological manipulation combined with chemical sedation, it's a form of torture. Will he recover completely? I believe so, but it will take time, and he'll need stability. No more upheaval, no more uncertainty. He'll have that, I promise. Betty was arrested first at Remy's office during what she thought was a routine therapy session. Detective Arrington had coordinated with the county prosecutor to have her picked up on charges of child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Jack was not there for the arrest, but Detective Arrington described it later. She denied everything at first, Lena said. Claimed you were mentally unstable and had kidnapped your own son. But when we played the recordings, she changed her story. Started blaming Vaughn. Said he manipulated her into it. Do you believe that? Hell no. That woman is ice cold. She planned this from the beginning. Remy Vaughn was harder to catch. When police arrived at his office, they found he'd cleared out his files and hadn't been seen for 2 days. Dr. Keller claimed ignorance of any wrongdoing and hired an expensive attorney. Jack got the call on Friday morning. Remy had been spotted at a gas station outside Kansas City, apparently heading for the state line. He's running, Detective Arrington said. We've got APB out, but I know where he's going. Jack interrupted. What? TheraShield Institute. He won't abandon his life's work, and all his money is tied up in that facility. How do you know? Because men like him don't run away. They double down. Jack was right. Remy was found at the TheraShield Institute, attempting to destroy financial records and patient files. When police arrived, he was in the process of burning documents in the parking lot. Jack drove out to watch the arrest. He stood across the street as officers led Remy to a patrol car in handcuffs. The man looked older than his photos, diminished by his circumstances, as they passed near Jack's position. Remy spotted him and stopped walking. You, he said, his voice filled with hatred. You destroyed everything. Jack stepped closer. You drugged my son. You took my life apart piece by piece. You made a 6-year-old boy forget his own father. He was better off without you. Without that toxic masculinity, that outdated patriarchal. Shut up, Jack said quietly, but something in his tone made Remy flinch. You're done talking. You're done manipulating people. You're done hurting children. The system will. The system is going to put you in a cage where you belong. Jack looked at the officers. Take him away. As the patrol car disappeared down the road, Jack felt no satisfaction. Justice wasn't supposed to feel empty. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real justice was just the absence of injustice, not some grand emotional release. The trial began 6 months later. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Rodriguez, had built an airtight case around the recordings, financial records, and medical evidence. Betty took the stand in her own defense, wearing a conservative blue dress and an expression of wounded innocence. Her attorney portrayed her as a victim of Remy's manipulation, a grieving mother who'd been convinced that faking her son's death was somehow in his best interest. Mrs. Reed, the prosecutor said during cross-examination, you transferred $60,000 to Dr. Vaughn's facility. Was that for your own therapy? It was for Milo's care. Care for a child who was supposed to be dead. Specialized care. Remy said Milo had severe psychological issues that required intensive treatment. Issues that required erasing his memory of his father. Betty's composure cracked slightly. Jack was unstable. Milo was afraid of him. The prosecutor played the recording of Betty and Remy discussing drug dosages. Does that sound like a mother concerned about her son's well-being? Betty had no answer. Jack testified on the third day. He spoke calmly and factually, describing his search for the truth and his discovery that his son was alive. The jury listened with rapt attention. Mr. Reed, Betty's attorney said during cross-examination, isn't it true that you broke into private property to obtain these recordings? Yes. Isn't it true that you have no formal training in child psychology or family therapy? Yes. So how can you be certain that your wife wasn't acting in your son's best interest? Jack looked directly at Betty, who was sitting at the defendant's table with downcast eyes. Because she looked me in the eye and told me my son was dead. She let me grieve for a child who was alive and 50 miles away. She let me blame myself for not being there when he needed me. She let me think I'd failed as a father. Jack's voice never rose, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. No mother acts in her child's best interest by making his father think he's dead. The most powerful testimony came from Milo himself. At 7 years old, he was considered competent to testify with special accommodations. The judge allowed him to speak from a closed-circuit television so he wouldn't have to face Betty directly. Milo, the prosecutor said gently, "Do you remember your father?" "Yes. He built me a tree house, and he taught me to ride my bike. And he makes funny voices when he reads stories." "Did your mother tell you that your father was dead?" "Yes. She said he didn't want me anymore because I was too much trouble." "Did you believe her?" "Sometimes. But I kept remembering good things. Like pancakes on Saturday morning. And playing catch in the backyard. And how he would check for monsters under my bed." "Were there monsters under your bed?" "No. But Dad always checked anyway, just to make sure." Several jurors were crying by the time Milo finished testifying. Betty was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Remy received 25 years. Dr. Keller, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received 5 years probation and lost his medical license. After the trial, Jack met with Detective Arrington at a coffee shop near the courthouse. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "What's that?" "I bought TheraShield Institute." Lena nearly choked on her coffee. "You what?" "When Remy was arrested, the facility went into bankruptcy. I made an offer through a lawyer. Cash purchase. With what money? Insurance settlement from Milo's death. Turns out, faking your child's death and then finding him alive is legally complicated. The insurance company settled out of court for $2 million rather than face the publicity nightmare. So you bought the place where they held your son prisoner." "I bought it, and I'm converting it." Jack pulled out a folder of documents. The Milo Foundation. Residential treatment facility for children who've been victims of psychological abuse and manipulation. Lena flipped through the papers. "This is brilliant. Remy spent 15 years building a reputation, accumulating resources, developing techniques to manipulate vulnerable families. All of that expertise, all those resources now, they belong to the children he tried to destroy. Poetic justice. Just justice. The poetic part is extra." 6 months after the conviction, Jack received a letter from Betty in prison. It was forwarded through his attorney since Betty was prohibited from contacting him directly. Jack recognized her handwriting on the envelope. Perfect penmanship, just like everything else about her public image. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he set it on his kitchen counter and went about his evening routine. Dinner with Milo, homework help, bedtime stories. Normal father-son activities that had been stolen from them for 6 months. After Milo was asleep, Jack picked up the letter and read it. "Jack, I know you won't want to hear from me, but I need to explain. I was sick. Not mentally ill, but spiritually sick. I lost my way and made terrible choices that hurt you and Milo. Remy convinced me that you were psychologically damaging Milo with your permissive parenting style. He said traditional fathers create weak men and that Milo needed to be freed from toxic masculine influence to become a healthy adult. That I know how this sounds now. But at the time, it felt like I was saving our son. I thought I was protecting him. I'm getting real therapy now. Good therapy. And I understand what I did was unforgivable. But I'm asking for forgiveness anyway, because I loved you both, even when I was hurting you, that I want to be part of Milo's life when I get out. Not as his mother, I know I lost that right, but as someone who cares about his well-being, someone who wants to make amends. Please think about it. For Milo's sake. Betty. Jack read the letter twice, then walked to the fireplace. He struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper, watching Betty's perfect handwriting curl and blacken. You don't get my rage, he said to the flames, and you don't get my peace. 2 years later, Jack and Milo moved to a small town outside Springfield, Missouri. Jack had bought a house with a large workshop where he could continue building furniture, and Milo had enrolled in a good elementary school where none of the teachers knew their story. Milo was 9 now, tall for his age and healthy. The nightmares had stopped 6 months ago. He played Little League baseball and had friends who came over for sleepovers. He was, by all accounts, a normal kid who happened to have an extraordinary story. Jack was building a dining room table when Milo came into the workshop after school. Dad, Mrs. Peterson wants to know if you can come to career day. What'd I talk about? Being a carpenter. She says I can introduce you. Jack smiled. What would you say? That my dad builds things, and that he never gives up when something is important. That evening, Jack and Milo sat on their back porch watching the sunset. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that comes from complete trust. Dad, Milo said finally, do you ever think about her? Your mother? Yeah. Jack considered the question. Sometimes. Do you miss her? I miss the person I thought she was. The woman I married. But that person wasn't real. Are you angry? No. Anger is too much energy to waste on someone who doesn't matter. Milo nodded as if this made perfect sense. I'm glad we moved here. Me too, buddy. And Dad? Thanks for finding me. Jack put his arm around his son and pulled him close. I would have searched forever. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here. The lies, the manipulation, the months of drugged captivity that had stolen precious time from both of them. Betty was serving her sentence in a minimum security facility, eligible for parole in 8 years. Remy would likely die in prison. Dr. Keller had moved to another state and started over. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was Milo's laugh when his friends told jokes. What mattered was the pride in his voice when he helped Jack with a woodworking project. What mattered was the future they were building together, one honest day at a time. You don't bury the past, Jack said quietly, remembering words he'd written in his journal months ago. You dig it up, confront it, and burn the rot. What grows after that's yours to keep. Milo looked up at him. What? Nothing, buddy. Just thinking out loud. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over their new life. A life built on truth instead of lies, on love instead of manipulation, on the unshakable foundation of a father who had never stopped fighting for his son.